You will have heard throughout this week that Dublin Airport is involved in a dispute with Fingal County Council over nighttime flights on its new north runway. Residents there have complained about noise, and the local authority has cited a breach of planning conditions, which the airport's operators, DAA, rejects. All of this is in the midst of surging passenger numbers as the airport bounces back to pre-pandemic operating levels. Eoghan Corry is editor of Air and Travel magazine. He joins me now on the line. Eoghan, you're very welcome to On the Record. Thanks for joining me today.
Good afternoon, Mandy. Lovely to be in touch.
Now, Eoghan, you wrote a fascinating piece this weekend in the Irish Independent about Dublin Airport, obviously citing that it has had a very strong post-COVID recovery. And actually, when I was reading the piece, it reminded me that this time last year, things were bad. And Dublin Airport have done a lot, haven't they, to kind of redeem themselves?
Yeah, it was a very difficult time for them. They weren't alone. Like, what happened really last year, and we're still only putting the pieces together, Mandy, was that aviation recovered pretty unevenly. And some of the airports were cut worse than others. Some of the airlines were in a better position to move. It happened that one of the best airlines that was in the best position to move was Ryanair. They kept their pilots employed. They kept their aircraft certified. It meant that they didn't go into a shed and have to go through all that certification process. And they kept their cabin crew employed. So when people started travelling again, and we got to remember how uncertain we were right up till about May or June of last year, and how uncertain we still are. About 1/3 of the people still a little bit uncertain about travelling again. So all of that was happening. Dublin Airport were caught, and one of Ryanair were really ready to go, and they ended up with larger numbers than they anticipated. They ended up with a couple of meltdowns, very well publicised. Listeners will remember end of March, end of May, when the security queues caused people to miss flights. And then we had this tarpaulin circus tent, I described it in the Irish Independent, constructed, which was never acquired again. But it was just this reminder that we've a shabby airport, we've a shabby in terms of services, shabby in terms of the food offerings, the cleaning of the toilets, all of that. They've managed to get all of that into shape. The one area that they were under a little bit of stress was the car park. Looked very grim in May. We're missing 6,000 spaces. The listeners will remember the old Quick Park in Santry. Never got going again. Ran into a couple of regulatory problems. And yet they managed to get through, and we're through probably the busiest day of the year today. We're in the middle of it now, Mandy.
OK, well, I want to bring in Dara Brady from Ryanair because he's here with me in studio, and high praise indeed for you there, Dara, from Eoghan. Yeah. You were ready. Dublin Airport weren't ready this time last year. The runway issues aside, are you now happy with the way that Dublin Airport are running this summer?
Well, firstly, afternoon to you too, Eoghan. Look, I think one of the things that we would say, we were one of the few airlines that said that we expected the recovery to bounce back quite quickly. I think what happened with many of the other airlines was they were not expecting the surge of demand which we had predicted would come. I think Dublin Airport were equally in that category of not being prepared with the right staffing levels at security. The customer experience was very poor throughout last summer, but indeed, this summer it's been much, much better in terms of the passenger experience at the airport. Most people are getting through security in a very quick period of time. So much, much improved this summer versus last summer.
OK, but the outstanding issue, Eoghan, just to bring you back in, that we see across the front pages today, particularly in the Business Post, is that the increase in activity and the associated noise has prompted an intervention from Fingal County Council, which we now read may be heading to the courts. What do you make of all that?
A little bit trickier than you made out in the initial intro there, Mandy, because it's nothing to do with the North Runway. It's actually a planning permission that's been around for a long time that meant reducing the level of night flights below than the level they were 7 years ago. It's not the second runway. It's actually bringing things back down to below what they were in the first runway. Now, Dublin Airport seemed to have taken they protested at the time, and they seem to have taken the attitude that this will be solved. And we've spent 7 years and it wasn't solved. And now they got a 6-week ultimatum, which could have, unless something delays that or changes that, will mean cancelled flights. It will mean Dara's in studio there. He'll be able to fill you in on Ryanair's predicament. A lot of their flights are before 7 in the morning. They can't be moved till after 7. It's the busiest hour, second busiest hour in the airport. And they're returning flights from the Canaries. If they can't land, you will have that issue of landing people in Shannon and busing people back. It's a big problem. It'll probably go to the courts. But the real issue here is the ticking clock. The 6 weeks Finglas County Council have given Dublin Airport to reduce their night flights. There are a couple of very obvious solutions. The first one is that you do what every other airport in Europe is doing and you monitor the noise rather than the number of flights. The Ryanair new aircraft that Ryanair have, and let's give Aer Lingus a shout, the new aircraft, the A321LR and the A320 family that Aer Lingus have, they're about 50% quieter than when this planning permission was introduced 7 years ago. And if you measure it by noise, it'll probably solve the problem. If you also change the time to midnight to 6 instead of 11 to 7, it'll probably solve the problem. But the problem needs to be solved, or we're going to be looking at cancelled flights. Yeah,
now I want to bring Dara back in here. Your boss, Michael O'Leary, very unhappy, as he often is with this, very unhappy with the minister, as he often is. This is the worst minister. This is about the 10th time I've heard him call a minister the worst minister. But his argument is, as Eoghan has said there, that this should be evaluated on noise rather than numbers of flights. Presumably you've had a couple of days to look at the ruling from Fingal County Council. I wanted to ask you specifically how this will affect Ryanair's operations, and if I am someone who has one of those flight tickets, what do I do now? Can I be expecting to be looked after by Ryanair?
Well, firstly, I would say that Michael's commentary in relation to this has been quite accurate. Like, we have now faced into yet another mismanagement by Minister Ryan and the DAA of this situation that is ultimately going to put passengers at significant risk of having their flights cancelled. Now, this isn't just an issue about flights in the night. This is a primary issue is we have 33 aircraft based in Dublin. Those aircraft are primarily starting to depart the airport from 6 a.m. That's people going out on their holidays to Spain, to Canaries. And those flights departing at 6 o'clock would no longer be able to, or a proportion of those flights would no longer be able to take off. Those aircraft can't be moved into later slots that are already full. There is also arrival airport slots. So the issue here is very significant. We don't know what exactly it is yet in terms of we haven't received any notification in terms of what exactly this enforcement would mean. But is clear
it's not very clear what it would mean.
Well, we don't know what the absolute number of reductions will be spread across
for
whoever is operating
you know what
for
the
us.
Terms that they're asking for.
What they're asking for is that we'd end up in a farcical situation of where we now have 2 runways at Dublin Airport, but yet we have less flights than when we had 1. So the situation here is a serious passenger issue, and we have repeatedly called over the last 2 to 3 days that Minister Ryan needs to come out and say, OK, look, sensible decisions need to be taken now.
And have you had any engagement with the Minister or the Department or DAA on this?
No, we've seen the usual tactic from the Minister, gone to ground, nothing to be done, nothing to be said, when the reality is there is a very simple solution, and Eoghan has alluded to it. If we were to move the times and have a very sensible discussion and say, look, move the times to 12, midnight and 6 a.m, that would mean any flights generally coming back would get in, because under the current proposal we're again in this farcical situation that we have a lot of air traffic control delays across Europe at the moment. If some passengers' flights was delayed getting back into Dublin and they arrive in at 11:30 or 11:45, in theory, based on this new judgment, they'd have to be diverted to Shannon, and we think that's unacceptable. It's an old condition that's in the planning, and the Minister needs to come out now and get people to solve it.
We've heard that, and with respect, I do think that the proposals that you're putting forward do seem fairly straightforward, and it's not a huge change from what they're asking, so I get all that. Really, I suppose what I was trying to find out is, do you have any idea how many people might be affected by it if they were to be applied like that, and what people might be able to do about it? So should I be changing my flights now?
Again, I would encourage passengers to wait and see. The enforcement takes 6 weeks. We'd have to notify passengers generally 2 weeks before their flight if there's going to be a change. And if there is a change and their flights are cancelled, they'll be given their options of a refund or moving their flights to another date. So passengers will be informed of their rights. They'll be notified 2 weeks in advance of any cancellations. But I would encourage passengers. We would expect this has to get sorted. This cannot be a situation of where passengers are the ones that are penalised on the basis of the mismanagement. So we definitely, we'd encourage passengers to sit tight. We'll inform them as soon as we know what's happening. But and they'll be given all their entitlements as part of that.
Eoghan, do you want to bring you back in here? Where do you see this going?
It needs to be solved. I think an intervention by the minister might do it. I do think that there was, as always, a little bit of a little bit of sort of macho, almost confrontational documents being exchanged that can usually be solved by a face-to-face or an intervention at political level. Just for the non-Ryanair traffic, there'll be about 45 flights impacted by this. Really big impact for the likes of the very late flights that go to Romania and Moldova. Very big impact for the Brazilian community in Dublin who fly home. Their flights through Lisbon are off early in the morning. Frankfurt, Air France to Paris, and a lot of the people transferring through Heathrow. Very big impact for all of those. So it's not just a bucket and spade issue. It's a business issue, and it's an issue for our very important migrant communities. So there are too many people's livelihoods and their ways of doing business at stake here for it to end up in a spat between a local authority and an airport.
Well, no doubt this is something that we're going to be hearing a lot about in the weeks and days ahead. But for now, we're going to have to leave it there. My thanks to Eoghan Corry and
always a pleasure, Mandy.